She's been erased from history books, edited out of photographs, and made to disappear for years at a time. Kim Jong-un's wife exists in a world where she's both the first lady of an entire nation and a woman who officially doesn't exist. Today, you're going to learn why North Korea goes to extreme lengths to hide the most powerful woman in the country and what her life really looks like behind the curtain of secrecy. Her name is Ri Sol-ju, and she's one of the most mysterious figures in modern politics. While first ladies in other countries give speeches, support causes, and appear regularly in public, Ri Sol-ju vanishes for months or even years without explanation. When she does appear, every detail of her presentation is carefully controlled. Her clothing, her expressions, where she stands, what she looks at, everything is calculated. But here's what makes her story absolutely fascinating. Before she married Kim Jong-un, she had a completely different life, one that the regime has tried desperately to cover up. We're going to piece together her real story using defector testimony, intelligence reports, rare footage, and the breadcrumbs North Korea accidentally left behind. This is the secret life of the woman North Korea pretends doesn't exist. Here's the core problem we're dealing with. In North Korea, information is power, and controlling information is how the regime maintains its grip on the country. When it comes to the Kim family, this information control reaches obsessive levels. Every detail of their lives is either propaganda or completely hidden. There's no middle ground. So when Kim Jong-un suddenly appeared with a woman by his side in 2012, it created a massive information void that the regime scrambled to fill with carefully crafted narratives while simultaneously trying to hide the truth. Why is this such a challenge to understand? Because North Korea doesn't operate like other countries. There are no interviews with Ri Sol-ju, no biographies, no social media presence, no candid photographs. Everything we see has been filtered through multiple layers of state propaganda. The regime decides when she appears, what she wears, where she goes, and even whether the North Korean people are allowed to know she exists at all. For years after her first appearance, North Korean state media didn't even mention her name. They just showed her silently standing next to Kim Jong-un without explanation. Think about how bizarre that is. The leader of the country is appearing in public with a woman, and the state media acts like she's invisible. Eventually, they acknowledged her existence and identified her as his wife, but the details about who she was remained extremely vague. This creates a unique challenge for anyone trying to understand her story. We have to work with fragments of information, some of it contradictory. South Korean intelligence agencies have spent years trying to piece together her background. Defectors who knew of her or her family have provided bits of information. Analysts have scrutinized every frame of video footage looking for clues. And slowly, a picture has emerged, though parts of it remain unclear. The challenge extends beyond just her personal story. Understanding Ri Sol-ju means understanding how North Korea uses women, how they control image and propaganda, how they construct the mythology around the Kim family, and how traditional and modern elements clash in North Korean culture. She represents something larger than herself. She's a carefully designed product meant to serve specific purposes for the regime, and those purposes have shifted over time. Another layer of complexity is that different sources provide different information about her. South Korean intelligence says one thing, Chinese sources say another. Defectors have their own versions. Some of this is because people genuinely don't know and are making educated guesses. But some of it might be intentional disinformation, spread by North Korea to muddy the waters and keep people confused about the truth. When dealing with North Korea, you always have to consider that what looks like information might actually be propaganda. So our challenge today is to cut through the propaganda, the speculation, and the missing pieces to understand who Ri Sol-ju really is, where she came from, what her life is like, and why North Korea treats her existence as both essential and invisible at the same time. Let's start at the beginning, or at least the beginning as far as we can reconstruct it. Ri Sol-ju was born sometime around 1989, though the exact date is unknown. She was born in Chongjin, which is a major city in northeastern North Korea. Chongjin is an industrial city, home to steel factories and other heavy industry. It's not Pyongyang, which is important because Pyongyang is where the elite live. Being from Chongjin suggests her family wasn't part of the absolute top tier of North Korean society, but they also weren't poor or low status. Her father's name is reportedly Ri Chol, and he was either a professor or worked in academia in some capacity. Her mother's background is less clear, but the family was apparently comfortable by North Korean standards. They had good sungbun, which is North Korea's caste system based on your family's political history. Good sungbun means your ancestors were loyal to the regime during the Korean War and in the years after. Without good sungbun, you can't access opportunities in North Korea, so this was essential for Ri Sol-ju's future. As a child and teenager, Ri Sol-ju showed talent in music and performance. According to defector accounts and intelligence reports, she trained as a singer and was part of various performance groups. North Korea has an extensive system for identifying talented children and training them in art, music, dance, and performance. These aren't hobbies. These are serious career tracks that can lead to positions in state performance groups like the Unhasu Orchestra or the Moranbong Band. Here's where her story gets really interesting. Multiple sources indicate that Ri Sol-ju was part of a North Korean cheerleading squad that went to South Korea for the Asian Athletics Championships in 2005. North Korea occasionally sends these cheerleading squads to international sporting events as a form of soft power propaganda. The cheerleaders are carefully selected, trained, and monitored. They wear matching outfits, perform synchronized cheers, and are meant to present an image of North Korean youth as happy, beautiful, and devoted to their country. If Ri Sol-ju was indeed part of this squad, and the evidence suggests she was, it means she would have been about 16 years old at the time. She would have traveled to South Korea, which is an almost unimaginable experience for a North Korean citizen. The selection process for these squads is intense. The girls have to be attractive, talented, from politically reliable families, and completely trustworthy because they're being exposed to the outside world. South Korean media and intelligence services took extensive footage and photographs of the North Korean cheerleaders during this event. Years later, after Ri Sol-ju's identity became known, analysts went back through this footage and believe they identified her in some of the shots. The woman they've identified looks similar to Ri Sol-ju's later appearance, though it's difficult to be absolutely certain. But if it is her, we have actual footage of her as a teenager before she became North Korea's First Lady. After returning from South Korea, Ri Sol-ju apparently continued her career in performance. Some reports indicate she traveled to China as part of performance groups. North Korea sends artistic delegations to China fairly regularly as part of maintaining their relationship. These trips would have given her more exposure to the outside world than the average North Korean, though she would have been closely supervised at all times. There are also reports, though less confirmed, that she studied music in China at some point. If true, this would be significant because studying abroad, even in China, is reserved for the children of the elite. It would suggest her family had more connections than initially apparent. However, other sources dispute this and say she only performed in China but didn't study there. The truth remains unclear. At some point in her late teens or early 20s, Ri Sol-ju came to the attention of Kim Jong Un. The exact circumstances of how they met are not publicly known, and probably never will be. Did he see her perform? Was she introduced to him by someone in his circle? Did he specifically request to meet her after seeing her somewhere? We don't know. What we do know is that by the early 2010s, she had become his partner. Now, let's talk about what it means to become romantically involved with Kim Jong Un. This isn't like dating a normal person, obviously. Kim Jong Un was being groomed to take over from his father, Kim Jong-il. He was part of the most powerful family in North Korea. Any woman who became involved with him was entering a world of extreme privilege combined with extreme control. She would have access to luxuries that ordinary North Koreans couldn't imagine, but she would also lose any semblance of personal freedom or privacy. There's an important cultural context here, too. North Korea is a deeply patriarchal society despite its socialist rhetoric about gender equality. Women are expected to be subservient to men, especially in family relationships. The ideal North Korean woman is loyal, hardworking, devoted to the revolution, and supportive of her husband. This traditional gender dynamic is even more pronounced in the Kim family, where the leader is essentially treated as a god king. Kim Jong-il, Kim Jong-un's father, had multiple wives and partners throughout his life. He had a official wife early on, then a preferred partner named Ko Young-hui, who was Kim Jong-un's mother, and various other relationships. These arrangements were kept secret from the North Korean public. The existence of these women and their children was not acknowledged in state media. So there was a precedent for the Kim family to have complex personal relationships that were hidden from public view. When Kim Jong-il died in December 2011, Kim Jong-un inherited power at the age of either 27 or 28, depending on which birth year you believe is accurate. He was young, relatively unknown to the North Korean public, and faced questions about his legitimacy and ability to lead. The regime needed to build him up as a strong, capable leader who commanded respect and loyalty. Every aspect of his public image was carefully managed to achieve this. In this context, the decision to reveal Ri Sol-ju as his wife was a calculated propaganda move. In July 2012, North Korean state media showed footage of Kim Jong-un attending various events with a young woman by his side. She was well-dressed, attractive, and appeared comfortable in high-profile settings. The state media initially didn't identify her or explain who she was. People inside North Korea and observers outside were left guessing. A few weeks later, state media finally identified her as Comrade Ri Sol-ju and described her as Kim Jong-un's wife. This was significant because it broke with the tradition of keeping the leader's family life secret. Kim Il-sung's wife was rarely seen. Kim Jong-un's partners were never publicly acknowledged during his rule. But here was Kim Jong-un openly appearing with his wife and allowing state media to show her face and name. Why the change in approach? Several factors probably influenced this decision. First, Kim Jong-un was young, and the regime wanted to present him as modern and relatable. Having a young, stylish wife made him seem more human and accessible compared to his father's mysterious personal life. Second, showing a traditional family image played well with North Korean cultural values about marriage and family. Third, Ri Sol-ju's appearance and demeanor could be used to soften Kim Jong-un's image and make him seem less threatening. But notice what wasn't revealed. State media didn't provide details about her background, her family, her education, or how they met. They just confirmed she existed and was his wife. The regime wanted to use her for propaganda purposes, but also maintain control over the narrative by limiting information. Let's talk about what Ri Sol-ju's early public appearances revealed about her role and the image the regime was trying to create. In the footage from 2012 and 2013, she appears at various events: opening of an amusement park, attending a concert, visiting a factory, watching a military parade. In all these appearances, several things stand out. First, her clothing. Ri Sol-ju wore fashionable outfits that were noticeably more modern and stylish than what North Korean women typically wore. Dresses with contemporary cuts, designer-looking handbags, fashionable shoes. This was deliberate. The regime was using her appearance to signal that North Korea was modern and sophisticated, not the backward, isolated country that outside observers often described. Some of her outfits and accessories appeared to be expensive foreign brands, which created controversy. Here's North Korea, a country where much of the population struggles with food security, and the First Lady is carrying what looks like a Christian Dior handbag worth thousands of dollars. The regime was sending a message to its own elite that Kim Jong-un's rule would maintain their privileged lifestyle, while simultaneously trying to impress international observers with displays of wealth and sophistication. Second, her demeanor. In these early appearances, Ri Sol-ju smiled, appeared relaxed, and sometimes showed emotion during performances or events. This was strikingly different from the rigid, formal presentation of North Korean officials who always appeared serious and carefully controlled. Again, this seemed calculated to make the leadership appear more human and relatable. Third, her positioning. In every appearance, Ri Sol-ju was clearly secondary to Kim Jong Un. She walked a step behind him. She stood to his side. She never spoke in any of the footage. She was visible but subordinate, which aligned with North Korean cultural expectations about gender roles and the supreme leader's status. The regime also used her to project specific messages at different times. When Kim Jong Un wanted to emphasize economic development, Ri Sol-ju appeared at the opening of new consumer facilities like the amusement park or the dolphinarium. When he wanted to emphasize military strength, she appeared at military events. When he wanted to emphasize cultural development, she appeared at concerts and performances. She was a prop in the propaganda, but an important one. Now, here's where things get strange. After being relatively visible throughout 2012 and 2013, Ri Sol-ju suddenly disappeared from public view in late 2013. She was simply gone. No explanation, no mention in state media. She didn't appear at events where you would expect to see her. This absence lasted for months, sparking all kinds of speculation. Was she pregnant? Had she fallen out of favor? Was she sick? Had she been purged? Was this normal and we just didn't understand North Korean protocol? Nobody knew. The regime offered no explanation. This pattern of appearing and then vanishing would repeat multiple times over the following years, and it reveals something important about how North Korea uses her. Ri Sol-ju's visibility is turned on and off like a switch, depending on what the regime needs at any given moment. When they want to project a certain image, they bring her out, dress her up, and parade her at carefully selected events. When they don't need her for propaganda purposes, she disappears completely. She exists at the regime's convenience, not as an independent person with her own public role. Let's talk about her pregnancies and children, because this is another area shrouded in mystery and propaganda. Based on her disappearances from public view and subsequent reports from intelligence agencies, it's believed that Ri Sol-ju has had at least 3 children, possibly 4. But here's the thing, North Korea has never officially confirmed the existence of any of these children. Not their births, not their names, not their genders, nothing. The first child was reportedly born in 2010, before Kim Jong Un even took power. This would mean she was already in a relationship with him while his father was still alive. Some intelligence reports suggest this child is a son. The second child was reportedly born around 2013, which would explain her first major disappearance from public view. Reports indicate this child might be a daughter. A third child was reportedly born around 2017 based on another extended absence from public view. Dennis Rodman, the former NBA player who bizarrely became friends with Kim Jong Un through several visits to North Korea, apparently met one of the children during a visit. He later mentioned that Kim had a daughter named Jue and described spending time with the family in a private setting. This was one of the few pieces of information about Kim Jong Un's children that came from someone who actually visited the country. In late 2022, something significant happened. North Korean state media released images and footage of Kim Jong Un attending a missile test, and with him was a young girl, maybe around 9 or 10 years old. She was holding his hand, and state media later identified her as his beloved daughter. This marked the first time North Korea officially acknowledged that Kim Jong Un had children. The timing and manner of this reveal is worth examining. Why show her now? Why at a missile test? Analysts believe this was the regime beginning to introduce the next generation of the Kim dynasty to the North Korean public. If Kim Jong Un has a daughter he's grooming as a potential successor, or at least as an important figure in the regime, they need to start building her public profile while she's young. This girl, believed to be Jue based on Rodman's previous comments, has appeared at several other events since then, always with her father. She watches missile launches, attends military banquets, and is shown being treated with great respect by generals and officials. The message is clear. This child is important. She's part of the ruling family. You should pay attention to her. But notice what we still don't know. Is Jue the oldest child, the middle child, or the youngest? What are the other children's names? Are there sons? If so, why aren't they being shown? In traditional Korean culture, and certainly in North Korea's patriarchal system, sons would typically be favored as successors. So if Kim Jong Un is showing off a daughter, what does that mean? Does he not have sons? Does he have sons but prefer his daughter for some reason? Or is this just the first step in revealing the next generation, with sons potentially appearing later? The existence and mystery around these children affects how we understand Ri Sol-ju's role. She's not just a wife for show. She's the mother of potential future leaders of North Korea. This gives her significant importance within the regime, even if that importance is never publicly acknowledged. The fact that the regime kept the children secret for so long and still hasn't fully revealed all of them shows how tightly they control information even about matters as basic as whether the leader has children. Let's examine what Ri Sol-ju's life is probably like day to day, based on what we know about how the North Korean elite live and specific information about the Kim family. She lives in one of several compounds reserved for Kim Jong Un and his immediate family. These compounds are in Pyongyang and in other locations around the country. They're heavily guarded, completely private, and equipped with every luxury imaginable. Inside these compounds, she has access to things that ordinary North Koreans can't even dream of: imported foods from around the world, luxury cars, private movie theaters, swimming pools, beautiful gardens. She can wear designer clothing and use expensive cosmetics and live a lifestyle that resembles wealthy elites anywhere in the world. In this sense, her life is one of extraordinary material privilege. But it's also a prison, just a very comfortable one. She can't leave without permission and heavy security. She can't travel freely even within North Korea. Every movement she makes is monitored and controlled. She has no privacy. Security agents are always present. Her phone calls, if she makes any, are monitored. Her internet access, if she has any, is restricted and monitored. She lives in a golden cage. Her daily routine probably involves caring for her children, though she likely has help from nannies and staff. She might pursue interests like music or art, though any hobby or activity would be done privately within the compound. She has no job in the conventional sense. Her role is to be Kim Jong-un's wife, mother to his children, and occasional propaganda tool when the regime needs her to appear in public. The power dynamics in her marriage are worth considering. In any marriage, there are power dynamics, but in this case, the imbalance is extreme. Kim Jong-un is the supreme leader of North Korea. He has absolute power over the country and everyone in it, including his wife. He can do literally anything he wants. If he's unhappy with her for any reason, she has no recourse. She can't divorce him, she can't leave, she can't complain to anyone. Her entire life depends on maintaining his favor. At the same time, she has access to information and influence that very few people in North Korea possess. She's in intimate proximity to the leader. She sees him in private moments. She might offer opinions or advice, though whether he listens is another question. She's the mother of his children, which gives her a certain status and protection. As long as she remains in his good graces, she's probably the most secure person in North Korea besides Kim Jong-un himself. But that security is conditional. North Korean history is full of examples of people who were close to the leader and then fell from favor with disastrous results. Kim Jong-un has had his own uncle executed, along with numerous other officials who displeased him. While it seems unlikely he would harm the mother of his children, the possibility exists. She has to be constantly aware of maintaining proper behavior and avoiding anything that could be interpreted as disloyalty or disrespect. Let's talk about the propaganda purposes she serves and how the regime has used her image over the years. When she first appeared in 2012, as we discussed, she was used to make Kim Jong Un seem modern, relatable, and human. The fashionable young wife standing by his side helped soften his image and made him seem less like a mysterious dictator and more like a normal person who happened to be leading a country. As time went on, the regime used her in different ways. When Kim Jong Un was trying to improve relations with South Korea and the United States in 2018 and 2019, Ri Sol-ju appeared more frequently. She attended the summits between Kim Jong Un and South Korean President Moon Jae-in. This was significant because it showed her in a diplomatic context, playing the role of First Lady similar to how First Ladies function in other countries. She was there to make Kim Jong Un seem like a legitimate world leader engaged in normal diplomatic relations. During Kim Jong Un's meetings with President Trump, Ri Sol-ju did not appear, which was probably a strategic choice. Those meetings were focused on nuclear negotiations and military issues, and the regime likely felt that having her present wouldn't serve their purposes. But at the inter-Korean summits with South Korea, which had a more cultural and reconciliation focus, her presence made sense. The regime also uses her to project messages to North Korean women. When she appears in public, her appearance and behavior communicate what the ideal North Korean woman should aspire to. She's fashionable but not provocative. She's educated and cultured but never outspoken. She's devoted to her husband and family. She supports the regime completely. She represents a modern version of traditional Korean femininity filtered through North Korean ideology. This is particularly important because North Korea needs women to fulfill specific roles in society. Women work in factories, farms, and markets. They're expected to maintain households and raise children to be loyal to the regime. They're supposed to embody revolutionary spirit while also conforming to traditional gender expectations. Ri Sol-ju serves as a model for this contradictory set of expectations. Interestingly, there have been periods where the regime seemed to pull back on showing her, possibly because they worried she was becoming too much of a focus. In North Korean ideology, the leader must be the center of everything. Nobody can overshadow him, not even his wife. If people start paying too much attention to Ri Sol-ju, if she becomes popular or interesting in her own right, that could be seen as problematic. So her visibility gets dialed back to keep her firmly in the supporting role. Now let's examine the mystery around her background and why the regime has worked so hard to obscure or perhaps rewrite her personal history. Remember how we talked about her possibly being part of the cheerleading squad that went to South Korea in 2005? And how she may have been a singer and performer? The regime has never confirmed these details and, in fact, seems to want them forgotten. Why? Because these aspects of her past don't fit the image they want to project. Being part of a cheerleading squad, while technically serving the regime, has associations with being young, attractive, and entertaining men. In conservative North Korean culture, this could carry implications they don't want attached to the First Lady. Having performed in various settings, possibly including performances for officials and elite audiences, raises similar issues. The regime prefers to present her as having always been dignified, educated, and suitable for her role as First Lady. They want people to think she comes from a good family, had proper education, and was always destined for an important position. The messier reality of her actually being a working performer trying to build a career doesn't serve that narrative. There are also rumors, impossible to confirm, that she may have been previously married or in another relationship before Kim Jong Un. In North Korean culture, where purity and loyalty are highly valued, having a First Lady who was previously married would be awkward for the regime. So, if there's any truth to such rumors, the regime would want that information completely buried. The challenge for the regime is that information about her past exists in South Korean records, in footage from international events, and in the memories of people who knew her. Some of these people have defected and can tell their stories. The regime can control what North Koreans know about her, but they can't completely control what the outside world knows. This creates an interesting split reality. Inside North Korea, Ri Sol-ju is whoever the regime says she is. Her background is whatever they claim it is. Her past has been rewritten to fit their needs. But outside North Korea, analysts and researchers have pieced together a different story based on available evidence. These two versions of her history exist in parallel, neither fully provable, neither completely disposable. Let's talk about how Ri Sol-ju compares to other women in the Kim family history, because understanding this context helps us understand her unique position. Kim Il-sung's wife, Kim Jong-suk, was a revolutionary fighter who fought alongside him against the Japanese occupation. She's treated as a revolutionary hero in North Korean propaganda, and her status is partially based on her own revolutionary credentials, not just her marriage to Kim Il-sung. She died young in 1949 and has been mythologized extensively since then. Kim Jong-il, as mentioned earlier, had multiple partners throughout his life. Ko Young-hui, Kim Jong-un's mother, was the most favored in his later years, but she was never publicly acknowledged during her lifetime. She was a dancer when Kim Jong-il met her, and their relationship was kept secret. She died in 2004, and only after Kim Jong-un came to power was she acknowledged and given the title of Mother of Great Songun Korea. Even then, details about her life remained scarce. Kim Jong-il's official wife, Kim Young-suk, was kept completely out of public view during most of his rule. She was married to him early in his career but fell out of favor. She's still alive, apparently, but has no public role and hasn't been seen in decades. There were also other women in Kim Jong-il's life, some confirmed, some rumored, but all kept secret. So Ri Sol-ju represents a significant departure from this pattern. She's the first wife of a North Korean leader to be regularly shown in public and acknowledged by name. This openness is relative, of course. Compared to first ladies in most countries, she's extremely secretive and controlled. But compared to her predecessors in the Kim family, she's surprisingly visible. This visibility comes with a price, though. She has to perform her role constantly when she's in public. She has to maintain the perfect image. She can never have a bad day, never look tired or unhappy, never say the wrong thing, because everything she does is scrutinized. The pressure must be immense, even if she's been trained for it. There's also the question of what happens to her if Kim Jong-un dies or is removed from power. In North Korean succession struggles, people associated with the previous leader can be vulnerable. If Kim Jong-un's chosen successor decides that Ri Sol-ju is a threat or simply wants to remove reminders of the previous leadership, she could be pushed aside or worse. Her long-term security depends entirely on how succession is handled and whether her children end up in positions of power. Let's discuss the international perspective on Ri Sol-ju and how she's been received outside North Korea. In South Korea, there's intense curiosity about her. South Korean media analyzes every appearance, looking for clues about her health, her relationship with Kim Jong-un, and what her presence or absence might signal about North Korean politics. Fashion magazines have discussed her style choices. News outlets speculate about her children and her influence. This attention makes sense because for South Koreans, North Korea isn't just a foreign country. It's the other half of their divided nation. Many South Koreans have family connections to the North that were severed by the Korean War. They see North Koreans, including Ri Sol-ju, as fellow Koreans living under a terrible system. There's sympathy mixed with curiosity. In China, where North Korea's leadership is watched carefully because of the country's close relationship, Ri Sol-ju is seen as a sign of generational change in North Korean leadership. The fact that Kim Jong-un has a publicly acknowledged wife and family makes him seem more conventional and predictable than his father. Chinese officials have interacted with Ri Sol-ju during state visits, and reports suggest she handles these interactions competently, which would be important for maintaining North Korea's relationship with its most important ally. In the United States and other Western countries, Ri Sol-ju is often portrayed as a tragic figure, a woman trapped in an abusive system with no freedom despite her material wealth. Human rights advocates point to her as an example of how even the most privileged North Korean women have no real autonomy or rights. At the same time, there's recognition that she's complicit in the regime by virtue of her position, even if she has no choice in the matter. The question of her complicity is worth examining. Is she a victim of the North Korean system or a beneficiary of it? The answer is probably both. She's certainly a victim in the sense that her life is not her own. She has no freedom to make real choices about how she lives, where she goes, or what she does. She's trapped in a role that was assigned to her, even if that role comes with immense privilege. But she's also a beneficiary in that she lives in luxury while most North Koreans struggle. She has access to the best food, healthcare, education for her children, and material comforts. Her position comes at the expense of the North Korean people who suffer under the regime that her husband leads and that she represents in public. Even if she's personally kind or sympathetic to their suffering, which we have no way of knowing, her very existence as First Lady makes her part of the oppressive system. This moral complexity is something we have to sit with. Real people in terrible systems rarely fit neatly into categories of pure victim or pure perpetrator. Ri Sol-ju exists in a gray area where multiple things are true at once. She has no real freedom. She lives in luxury. She's trapped. She benefits. She had no choice in becoming who she is now. She represents and legitimizes a brutal regime. Let's talk about what we can learn from North Korea's treatment of Ri Sol-ju about how authoritarian regimes control information and image. The regime's handling of her shows several important principles that apply broadly to how such systems operate. First, information is released strategically only when it serves the regime's purposes. Ri Sol-ju's initial appearance wasn't random. It was timed and planned to achieve specific propaganda goals. Her subsequent disappearances and reappearances follow this same pattern. The regime never explains her absences because they don't have to. They control the narrative completely inside North Korea, and they don't care what outsiders think as long as their domestic audience remains controlled. Second, the regime maintains flexibility by keeping details vague. By never providing comprehensive information about her background, family, education, or children, they keep their options open. They can adjust the narrative as needed. If they decide later that some detail needs to be changed or emphasized, they can do so because they never committed to a detailed public story in the first place. Third, the regime uses her to project different messages to different audiences simultaneously. To North Koreans, she represents the ideal revolutionary woman supporting the supreme leader. To South Koreans and the international community, she represents North Korea's modernity and normalcy. These messages can coexist because different audiences see different things based on their own expectations and knowledge. Fourth, the regime demonstrates its total control by making her visible and invisible at will. The power to make someone disappear from public life for months and then bring them back without explanation is itself a demonstration of absolute control. It sends a message to everyone in North Korea. Your existence, your visibility, your recognition are all granted by the regime and can be withdrawn at any time. Fifth, the regime shapes perception by controlling access completely. Because nobody can interview her, photograph her candidly, or observe her in unscripted settings, every single image and video we have of her has been approved by the regime. This gives them total power to construct her public image however they want. She becomes less a real person and more a character they've created, and we only see the character, never the person behind it. These principles extend beyond just how they handle Ri Sol-ju. This is how North Korea manages information about everything. Economic statistics, military capabilities, domestic politics, international relations, all of it is filtered through the same system of strategic release, vague details, multiple messages, demonstrations of control, and complete access restriction. Now let's consider what Ri Sol-ju's life might be like behind closed doors, acknowledging that much of this is speculation based on what we know about North Korean elite life and human nature. Does she love Kim Jong Un? Did she ever have a choice in marrying her? These questions are unanswerable, but worth thinking about. It's possible that she did have genuine feelings for him when they met. He was young, powerful, and represented the possibility of a life of privilege and importance. She may have been attracted to him personally. It's also possible that she understood this was an opportunity she couldn't refuse, and that whatever her personal feelings, she had to play the role expected of her. By now, after more than a decade together and multiple children, they've built a life together, regardless of how it started. They probably have moments of genuine connection, shared experiences, raising their children, private jokes, and routines that all long-term couples develop. At the same time, the power imbalance and the circumstances of their life together mean it could never be a normal relationship. Does she know the full extent of what her husband does? The executions, the prison camps, the repression? Almost certainly yes, at least in general terms. She's not sheltered from all information. She's part of the inner circle. She probably hears discussions about policy and challenges the regime faces. The question is how she processes this information and what, if anything, she thinks or feels about it. It's possible she's fully indoctrinated and believes the regime's ideology completely. That she sees the prison camps and executions as necessary measures to protect the revolution. That she views critics and defectors as traitors who deserve punishment. This would be consistent with how she was raised and educated in North Korea. It's also possible she has doubts or moral qualms, but keeps them completely hidden because expressing them would be dangerous even in private. Many people in authoritarian systems develop a kind of double consciousness, where they publicly support the system while privately harboring reservations. She might be one of those people. Or she might not think about it much at all, focusing instead on her immediate life, her children, her daily concerns, and avoiding contemplating the bigger moral questions because they're too overwhelming and she has no power to change anything anyway. This kind of willful ignorance is a common survival mechanism in difficult situations. The truth is, we can't know what she thinks or feels because we have no access to her genuine thoughts. Everything we see is performance, even if some of that performance might align with her real thoughts. She exists for us only as a public figure, and her inner life remains completely hidden. Let's examine some specific appearances she's made over the years and what they revealed or concealed. In 2018, when Kim Jong Un traveled to Singapore for his first summit with President Trump, Ri Sol-ju stayed behind in North Korea. This was notable because it broke with the pattern of some earlier appearances where she had accompanied him on important trips. The decision to leave her behind for the Trump summit suggests the regime calculated that her presence wouldn't help their goals in that particular context. Nuclear negotiations with the United States were serious business, focused on security and military matters, and perhaps they felt bringing his wife would seem too casual or personal for the gravity of the situation. However, during Kim Jong-un's trips to China to meet with President Xi Jinping, Ri Sol-ju did accompany him on at least some of these visits. These trips were framed as state visits between allies, and having the First Lady present made sense in that diplomatic context. Photos and videos from these visits show Ri Sol-ju meeting with Xi Jinping's wife, Peng Liyuan, who is also a former singer and performer. The two women were photographed touring sites together, watching performances, and engaging in the kind of cultural diplomacy that First Ladies often conduct. These appearances with Peng Liyuan are particularly interesting because they show Ri Sol-ju in a role that resembles how First Ladies function in other countries. She's engaging in soft diplomacy, building personal connections that complement the official negotiations happening between the leaders. The fact that both women have performance backgrounds probably gave them something to connect over, though we have no record of their private conversations. During the Inter-Korean summits in 2018, when Kim Jong Un crossed into South Korea to meet with President Moon Jae-in, the images were historic. A North Korean leader setting foot in South Korea for the first time since the Korean War. The symbolism was powerful. And there was Ri Sol-ju, part of this historic moment, representing North Korea alongside her husband. South Korean media went absolutely crazy analyzing every detail of these appearances. What was she wearing? How did she interact with Moon Jae-in's wife, Kim Jong-suk? What did her presence signal about North Korea's intentions? Fashion magazines did entire spreads analyzing her outfits and comparing her style to Kim Jong-suk's. The attention was intense and revealed how hungry people are for any glimpse into North Korean leadership's personal lives. One moment that got particular attention was during a performance where Ri Sol-ju was seen wiping tears from her eyes. The performance included songs about Korean reunification and the shared history of the Korean people. Her emotional response seemed genuine, though, of course, in the context of North Korean propaganda, nothing can be taken at face value. Was she really moved by the music and the moment, or was this a calculated display of emotion designed to make her, and by extension her husband, seem more human and sincere about peace? The answer could be both. She might have genuinely felt emotional, while also knowing that showing that emotion served a propaganda purpose. Human psychology doesn't always separate genuine feeling from performance, especially for someone who has spent years in the public eye knowing every gesture is watched and interpreted. Another significant appearance was at the opening of a new residential area in Pyongyang called Ryomyang Street in 2017. This was a prestige project meant to showcase North Korea's development and modernity. Ri Sol-ju appeared at the opening ceremony, and footage showed her walking through the new apartments with officials, looking at the facilities and furnishings. The apartments were modern by North Korean standards, with decent-sized rooms and contemporary fixtures. This appearance served multiple propaganda purposes. It showed the regime caring about people's living conditions and delivering improved housing. It showed Ri Sol-ju taking interest in domestic issues and the welfare of citizens. And it reinforced the image of North Korea as a developing, modernizing country rather than the impoverished failure state that critics often describe. The reality, of course, is that these showcase apartments went to the most loyal and privileged citizens, while the majority of North Koreans lived in far worse conditions. But that reality doesn't make into state media coverage. Ri Sol-ju's presence at the opening was part of selling a carefully constructed narrative about progress and prosperity. Let's talk about her fashion choices in more detail because they've been a source of both fascination and controversy. In her public appearances, Ri Sol-ju has worn outfits that appear expensive and fashionable, sometimes bearing resemblance to designs from luxury Western brands. This has created interesting contradictions. North Korea officially promotes an ideology of self-reliance called Juche, which emphasizes independence from foreign influence. The country is also heavily sanctioned, making it difficult to import luxury goods legally. Yet here's the First Lady wearing what appear to be designer clothes and carrying luxury handbags. How does this square with the regime's ideology and the country's economic situation? The answer is that rules for the elite in North Korea are completely different from rules for everyone else. While ordinary citizens are taught to embrace self-sacrifice and make do with limited resources, the Kim family and the top elite live like wealthy people anywhere in the world. They have access to imported goods smuggled through China or other channels. They can afford anything they want because they control the country's limited resources. Ri Sol-ju's fashion serves a specific purpose, though. It's meant to signal that North Korea is not poor or backward, that the leadership is sophisticated and worldly, that the country can provide its First Lady with the same quality of goods that First Ladies in wealthy countries enjoy. It's a form of aspirational propaganda. The regime is saying, look how well we're doing, look how successful our leader is, as evidenced by his stylish wife. But this creates tension with the wider population who struggle with basic necessities. Most North Koreans will never own anything remotely as nice as what Ri Sol-ju wears to a single event. The gap between her life and theirs is unfathomable. The regime manages this tension by strictly controlling what information reaches the general population. Most North Koreans probably see limited footage of her, and that footage is framed in ways that emphasize her role as a revolutionary wife supporting the leader, rather than as a fashion figure. Her hairstyles have also been analyzed extensively. She's appeared with different hairstyles over the years, from more traditional Korean styles to more modern cuts. Some analysts have suggested that changes in her hairstyle correlate with shifts in North Korean policy or messaging. A more traditional style when the regime wants to emphasize Korean cultural values, a more modern style when they want to project openness to the outside world. Whether these correlations are intentional or just observers reading too much into random choices is debatable. What's not debatable is that every aspect of her appearance when she appears in public has been carefully considered by multiple people. She doesn't just wake up and choose an outfit. There are people whose job is to plan her wardrobe for each appearance, based on the message the regime wants to send. Her hair is styled by professionals. Her makeup is done carefully. She's a living propaganda tool, and like any tool, she's maintained and presented with great care. Now let's discuss the question of Ri Sol-ju's influence and whether she has any real power within the North Korean system. This is extremely difficult to assess because we have no insight into private conversations or decision-making processes. But we can make some educated guesses based on how power typically works in systems like this. In absolute monarchies and dictatorships throughout history, the wives and consorts of rulers have sometimes wielded significant informal influence even when they had no official power. They had access to the ruler in private moments. They could offer opinions and advice. They could advocate for certain people or against others based on her interactions with them. She might influence his thinking on cultural matters or on how North Korea presents itself to the world. But this influence, if it exists, is entirely dependent on maintaining his favor and never openly challenging his authority. The moment she crossed a line or made him angry, whatever influence she had would disappear. This is the nature of power in autocratic systems. It flows from the top down, and everyone else's power is borrowed and conditional. There's also the question of whether she has any independent political views, or whether she simply reflects her husband's thinking. Given her education and background in North Korea's system, she was probably thoroughly indoctrinated from a young age. Her political views, assuming she has any that are genuinely her own, likely align closely with regime ideology. She probably believes, or has convinced herself to believe, that the Kim family's rule is legitimate and necessary for Korea. At the same time, her exposure to the outside world, limited though it is, might have given her perspectives that differ from the typical North Korean party line. She's traveled to China and South Korea. She's seen how other countries function. She's interacted with foreign officials and their spouses. These experiences might have planted questions or doubts, or they might have simply reinforced her belief in North Korean superiority, depending on how she processed them. Some defectors and analysts have speculated that Ri Sol-ju might be a moderating influence on Kim Jong Un, encouraging him toward engagement with the outside world and economic reform rather than isolation and military confrontation. The evidence for this is thin and largely based on the fact that she's appeared during periods when North Korea was pursuing diplomacy. But correlation isn't causation, and it's entirely possible her appearances during these periods were just propaganda choices rather than reflections of her influence. The truth is, we're probably giving her too much credit by even speculating about her political influence. She may have no influence at all beyond her immediate household. Kim Jong Un makes decisions based on his own calculations and the advice of his senior officials, all of whom are experienced party and military figures. His wife, regardless of his personal feelings for her, is probably not someone he turns to for strategic guidance. Let's examine what happens during the periods when Ri Sol-ju disappears from public view, because these absences are as significant as her appearances. We've established that some of these absences likely coincide with pregnancies, but even accounting for that, there are long periods where she's simply gone, with no explanation. During these disappearances, North Korean state media continues to show Kim Jong Un at various events and activities, but he appears alone or with officials, never with his wife. There's no mention of her, no explanation of where she is or why she's not present. For the North Korean public, who only know what state media tells them, she simply ceases to exist during these periods. This creates several possible interpretations. One is that she's fallen out of favor and is being punished or sidelined. Historical precedent from Kim Jong-il's time shows that women in his life could be pushed aside if they displeased him. Another interpretation is that she's sick or recovering from childbirth or other medical issues. A third is that these absences are strategic, allowing the regime to control when and how she's used for propaganda purposes. The most likely explanation is probably a combination of factors. Some absences are likely due to pregnancy and childbirth. Others might be times when the regime simply doesn't need her for propaganda purposes and finds it easier to keep her out of sight. And there might be periods when she's genuinely sick or recovering from health issues that the regime doesn't want to publicize. What these absences reveal most clearly is that she exists entirely at the regime's discretion. She has no independent public presence. She can't maintain her own schedule of appearances or develop her own public role. She appears when summoned and disappears when dismissed. This is the clearest illustration of her lack of agency despite her privileged position. The longest absence on record was from March 2014 to December 2014, a gap of about 9 months. This likely corresponds to a pregnancy, though North Korea never confirmed this. When she reappeared after this absence, state media showed her attending various events with Kim Jong Un, and she looked healthy and normal. No explanation was given for where she had been, and North Korean citizens certainly weren't going to ask. More recently, there was a significant gap in her appearances during 2020 and 2021, coinciding with the COVID pandemic. North Korea closed its borders completely and became even more isolated than usual during this period. The regime was extremely paranoid about the virus, and Kim Jong Un himself appeared less frequently in public during this time. Ri Sol-ju's absence during this period makes sense in that context. The regime was limiting public events generally, and there was no need for her propaganda presence when the country was in lockdown. When she reappeared in 2022, analysts noted that she looked different, possibly older or more tired. This sparked speculation about her health and whether she had been ill with COVID or some other condition. But again, North Korea offered no information, so speculation was all anyone could do. Let's talk about what the future might hold for Ri Sol-ju, acknowledging that predicting anything about North Korea is extremely difficult. Several scenarios are possible depending on how events unfold. In the most likely scenario, where Kim Jong Un remains in power for many more years, Ri Sol-ju will probably continue in her current role, appearing periodically for propaganda purposes and raising their children in private. As the children get older and are introduced more publicly, she might appear more frequently as the regime builds up the next generation of the Kim dynasty. She'll age, her fashion will evolve, but her fundamental role as the controlled and displayed wife of the supreme leader will remain the same. If Kim Jong Un dies or is removed from power while their children are still young, Ri Sol-ju's situation becomes much more precarious. Succession struggles in North Korea have historically been brutal, and people associated with the previous leader can be vulnerable. She would depend entirely on whoever takes power next and whether they see her and her children as threats or as useful for legitimizing their own rule. If one of her children eventually becomes the next leader, which seems possible given that the regime has started showing Kim Ju-ae publicly, then Ri Sol-ju's status would be elevated significantly. She would become the mother of the supreme leader, a position of great honor in Korean culture. Kim Jong-un's mother, Ko Young-hui, was posthumously given grand titles for this reason. Ri Sol-ju, if she lives to see her child take power, would likely receive similar treatment. There's an outside possibility, though remote, that political changes in North Korea could eventually lead to the regime's collapse or significant reform. In that scenario, Ri Sol-ju's fate would depend on how the transition occurs. If it's violent and chaotic, she could be in physical danger as a symbol of the old regime. If it's managed and peaceful, she might be allowed to live quietly in exile somewhere. She could potentially face prosecution for her role in the regime, though whether she actually committed any prosecutable acts beyond being the leader's wife is questionable. The scenario that seems most unlikely is that she somehow escapes and defects. She's far too watched and controlled for that to be possible. She has children who would be left behind if she somehow fled. And she probably has family members in North Korea whose lives would be destroyed if she defected. Even if she wanted to leave, which we have no indication she does, the practical obstacles would be insurmountable. Another consideration for her future is health. We know nothing about her actual health status, but she's now in her mid-30s, and she's been through multiple pregnancies. If she develops serious health problems at some point, the regime would face a decision about whether to acknowledge this publicly. Kim Jong Un's father and grandfather both had health issues that were hidden from the public for years. So there's precedent for the regime concealing such information. But if something happened to her that couldn't be hidden, it would create a propaganda challenge for the regime. Let's consider what Ri Sol-ju represents symbolically for different groups of people who observe North Korea. For North Korean citizens, at least those who are aware of her existence, she represents the first family, and by extension, the state itself. She's a symbol of success and loyalty to the regime. Her fashionable appearance and seeming contentment tell North Koreans that life under Kim Jong-un's leadership is good and that the country is prosperous, even if their own experiences contradict this message. For South Koreans, she's a figure of curiosity and sometimes sympathy. South Koreans understand that she's trapped in a system, even if she lives in luxury. She represents the human face of North Korean leadership, making Kim Jong-un seem less like a distant dictator and more like a real person with a family. This humanization can actually be a propaganda victory for North Korea because it makes the regime seem more normal and less threatening. For the international community and human rights advocates, she's a complicated figure. On one hand, she's a victim of a system that denies basic freedoms to everyone, including the elite. On the other hand, she benefits enormously from that same system while millions of North Koreans suffer. She can't be separated from the regime she represents, even if she had no choice in becoming part of it. For women's rights activists specifically, Ri Sol-ju represents the ultimate expression of patriarchal control. Here's a woman who appears to have everything, wealth, status, a family, yet has no real autonomy or freedom. She's valued entirely for her relationship to a man and her ability to produce heirs. Her identity is subsumed completely into her role as wife and mother. She has no career, no independent voice, no ability to make choices about her own life. She's the gilded cage taken to its extreme. At the same time, some North Korean women might look at her as an aspirational figure. In a country where most people struggle daily for survival, she has security, comfort, and status. The fact that these come at the cost of freedom might seem like an acceptable trade-off when your alternative is poverty and hardship. This doesn't make the situation less tragic, but it reflects the reality of choices people make in desperate circumstances. So here we are, more than a decade after Ri Sol-ju first appeared in public, and she remains one of the most mysterious and controlled figures in modern politics. The core revelation of her story is this: even at the highest levels of North Korean society, even in the first family itself, freedom doesn't exist. Control is total. Individual identity is subsumed into the needs of the regime. Think about what her existence tells us about North Korea as a system. This is a country where the supreme leader's wife can be made to appear and disappear at will, where her background can be obscured or rewritten, where her children's existence can be denied for years, where every single image of her has been filtered through layers of propaganda control. If this is what life is like for the most privileged woman in the country, imagine what it's like for everyone else. The most striking aspect of her story is the contradiction between visibility and invisibility. She's shown to the world in carefully staged appearances, yet her real self remains completely hidden. We've seen her hundreds of times in photos and videos, yet we know almost nothing about who she actually is as a person. She's simultaneously one of the most photographed women in North Korea and one of the most secret. This perfectly encapsulates how North Korea functions as a propaganda state. Everything is performance. Everything is controlled. Reality is whatever the regime says it is at any given moment. Truth is malleable and serves political purposes. Individual human beings, even ones in positions of apparent power, are just pieces to be moved around on the board according to the regime's needs. The tragedy of Ri Sol-ju's story is that we'll probably never know her actual story, not while the current regime exists. Her real thoughts, feelings, experiences, and personality are locked away behind walls of security and propaganda. We see only what we're allowed to see, and what we're allowed to see is not a real person, but a carefully constructed character designed to serve the regime's purposes. Hit subscribe to see more stories they don't want you to know.